Hello. Hello. All right. Welcome. Welcome to MagentoLive UK 2016. It's good to see you all. Thanks for joining me for a workshop in design thinking. My name is Keith Howard. I am the Director of User Experience for Magento. I have experience designing products for many years for companies like Google, Dell, and Magento. And today, I'm responsible for designing all of Magento's products. Eric Irway's joined me today, another designer from the team. And today, we're going to teach you a little bit about how designers prefer to work. Now, first, I'd like to talk to you about our Magento 2.0 launch. And I'd also like to share with you a story from the upcoming release of Magento 2.1, which I think really illustrates how we like to work as designers. Then Eric's going to come up and start walking you through the individual phases one by one and teaching you about the process. Today, we're going to go beyond just an introduction. This is actually a workshop. We're going to be asking you to perform a couple of small activities to help learn the techniques we're talking about. The whole process will last just about an hour, and we'll close with questions and answers. Now, you all have a workbook in front of you. So we'll be using this workbook today for the session. You should all have one. This is yours to keep. We hope that you take it home with you and use it with your work. You'll see that this technique actually works for anyone, regardless of your role. It helps you solve problems. Now, as in the spirit of full disclosure, we normally do this workshop in 3 hours. Today, we've been asked to do it in just about an hour. And so what we're going to do is we're going to walk you through the workbook together. You'll see us transition from the workbook to some slides. And we'll walk you through it. And what we've done to help speed the process along is we've filled in some of the answers for you, which will help us cut down that time. Again, we're trying to do it in an hour, so you are guinea pigs. And we would appreciate your feedback at the end of it to let us know how we did. Now, this is an introduction to the workshop. It basically says what I've already said. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about Magento 2.0. So, some housekeeping. I have to warn you. We've been warned that at 1:20 p.m. there's going to be a fire alarm. So that's really unfortunate. So when that happens, let's all just take a moment to have a break, have a drink, or have a chat, and enjoy the alarm. There's nothing we can do about it, unfortunately. It would be a good test. So let's talk about Magento 2. So in November of last year, we released Magento 2.0, and this was a very proud moment for us as a company. It represented the culmination of hundreds of Magento employees, countless hours, real dedication to this updated product. And with that, we made radical improvements to the architecture, to the performance, to the security, making it easier to upgrade, easier to scale. But on top of that, the changes weren't just to the architecture. The changes actually included changes and updates to the experience. Not all the changes were just on the surface. And so here you see Magento 1.14. This is one of the product catalog screens. This is the exact same screen in Magento 2.0. You can see we've radically updated the styling, making it easier to read, easier to scan, easier to find and update your information. This is a tweet from Kaylin Jordan. It's one of my favorites, going on about how beautiful and fast new Magento is. And we were very flattered by this. We really appreciate the feedback. But it's important for me to remind you that the changes that we made are not just to the surface. It's not just skin deep. Magento is a platform unrivaled in power, flexibility, and performance. And it's my job as the lead designer to make sure that all of that power and flexibility comes to you while the product remains easy to use. So design thinking is the process that we use to redesign Magento. Now, designers have been working this way for many, many years. But what's happened is that in recent years, certain companies, Stanford's Design School and IDEO, one great example, have taken these methodologies and they've refined them into a repeatable series of steps, a framework that anyone can use to solve problems. That's what we're going to talk about here today. Now, designers have been working this way for many years, and there's been many names for these techniques. What's important to know that all the lessons learned in these techniques have been refined and applied to this new framework called design thinking. So all of these buzzwords still actually hold true. The lessons learned are still with us. So I think it's best to illustrate this technique if I share with you a story from an upcoming, very soon, release of Magento called 2.1. So there's a new feature in 2.1. It's called staging. And what this feature is going to allow you to do is take any piece of content on the site, schedule it to go live at any date or time in the future, so you don't have to work late or weekends anymore to update your site. You just schedule it. It's a highly anticipated feature. My team actually started working on this feature over a year ago, and we did a lot of research, a lot of planning, a lot of preparation, and after some time, we reached a design. We are feeling pretty confident about this design, and at this point, what we do is we prototype the design so that we have a working example of it. We take it to 10 merchants, and we test it. We get their feedback. So we took it to those merchants, we tested it, and it didn't go well. What we found was the design had many problems. Users were struggling to complete their task. They were frustrated. They were complaining. And I have to say, I've been doing this for a while, and I can't recall a first draft of anything performing so poorly. I was a little shocked. After each task, we actually asked the participants to tell us, how are you feeling? Was it easy? We asked them to score these things, and we record the scores. These are terrible scores. It was a little embarrassing, so I don't know why I'm sharing it with you. But what we did was, several months later, we improved the design, and we tested it again. We got much better scores. Now, what we did was we completely redesigned the product as a result of our first test. We ran the test again. Same questions, often the same participants, dramatically better scores. Same designers, same problems. So the feedback also improved dramatically. So what did we do? What did we change from design 1 to design 2? When we went back and we started over, what we discovered was that we had tested or spoken to too many users of the current system, the staging system. Turned out those users happened to be very technical. What we had done is we had the wrong mix of users. The mix of users was too technical. So our design was skewed to the technical side. Technical users found it easy to use, but non-technical users struggled. So when we went back and we started over, we redesigned the system. We designed a system that worked for non-technical users first. And in the process, we designed something that worked well for everyone. Now, this is actually an example of the screen. You can see here at the top, you can see the scheduled changes that are coming, and it's easy for you to spot changes that are coming to a product and easily to access them and make changes to them. With these changes in place, the users found it really easy to make the changes and update them, and they actually reported high satisfaction in doing so. That was the scores that you saw just before. But there was more. Along the way in all these interviews, we started to get a real sense of what the work was like. So we were speaking to a lot of marketers, and they talked about multiple campaigns running simultaneously, starting and ending, overlapping, different products, changing, starting, stopping. It was really easy to lose track, really easy to get confused with their work. And so through this process, we designed a new feature. This is the staging dashboard. And what this does is just a calendar view. But it lets you easily see which campaigns are running when and easily access them, modify them. With this view, it's much easier for users to manage their work and for them to make sense of it all. And we know this because we spoke to them. They told us so. When we showed them these designs, we got really, really positive feedback. So what did we accomplish? We avoided making an expensive mistake. It cost us just as much to build the bad design as the good one. What's more, we learned how to make staging easier to use. And on top of that, we discovered new opportunities to make the product even better. And we did all of this by using design thinking. So I hope that's given you a sense of how design thinking works and how it can help you solve problems. Again, anyone can use this regardless of role or function. We're going to give you a high-level summary of the process today. And without further ado, I think I'd like to introduce Eric to walk us through the individual phases.
Great. Thank you, Keith. Hi, everybody. So again, my name is Eric Irway. So these are the results that we saw in Magento 2. So let's talk about the process that we used in design thinking. So what is design thinking? Again, simply put, design thinking is a process for innovation. It's about your customers. It's about understanding their needs. It gives us a method to quickly test and move forward with the very best of them. So why should we use it? It's really not a process just for designers. It's for engineers. It's for marketers. It really doesn't require a lot of formal training. Doesn't require a lot of technology. So it's really easy to get started with this. And a lot of businesses are using this. Design thinking will ensure that you deliver great experiences for your customers while saving you time and money. While it takes time to master, you'll be surprised at the results very early in the process. So let's take a look at some examples if you don't use design thinking. I don't know if either one of these look familiar to you. On the left, you see a pretty good case for universal remote control. I've seen this quite a bit at home when describing this to another family member. How do you use this? How do you use that? On the right, a poor subway ticket machine. Classic telltale signs of notes everywhere trying to let you know where to start, but if you say it 3 times, it doesn't really stick for this. And so reality is both of these situations could be avoided if you involve your customer, and that's really what design thinking is about. So as Keith mentioned, we're going to walk you through the phases in a little bit more detail. So kind of going from left from right. Empathize is about understanding the users and understanding those problems. Define takes that understanding, synthesizes the data, and begins to identify those root causes. Ideate is about brainstorming solutions to those same problems identified, and then we take those into prototype. Again, it doesn't take much, but you're going to want to build a simulation to better understand that design. And then finally, test. If there's anything that you learned today, it's really about test. You want to evaluate those designs to see if it actually works. So you may be saying to yourself, what about Agile? Well, the goals of design thinking and Agile are essentially the same. Focus on the customer and quickly iterate throughout the process. The first iteration will rarely, if ever, be the optimal solution. So it works great. So as you begin to use design thinking, the number of ideas really change from phase to phase, and we like to call this divergent and convergent thinking. So in the diagram you see here, you actually see with an empathize and with ideate, those ideas, which are seen as those dots, actually increase, and we call that diverge. They converge, though, at define, prototype, and test. Divergent thinking compels designers to expand their set of ideas and concepts, while convergent thinking drives us to focus our ideas towards an answer. So by divergent and convergent thinking at different stages in the product, we enable maximum creativity while simultaneously driving for results. These are the essentials of design thinking. So now that we have a common understanding, let's start to look at these in more detail. So if you see this in front of you here, we've talked a little bit about the workbook. So with the workbook, Keith and I are going to walk you through each of the 5 phases. We'll go to this workbook from time to time. In these pages, in these exercises, we're going to apply them in groups using a series of activities, most of which are going to be done for you given the limited time that we have today. So in order to accomplish that, I'm going to introduce you to today's design challenge. So in today's design challenge, you're going to be the customer. You're going to be interested in purchasing a new mobile plan using your existing mobile or tablet device that you brought here today. You're hoping to find a plan that meets your needs, and you can draw upon your personal experiences, but don't take too long. We've done this in the past. We tend to generate a lot of data through here. So with empathize, let's start off with using the scenario from the design challenge. It's no coincidence that this process literally starts with your customers. Empathize is about gaining that deep understanding of people's needs and creating meaningful solutions around them. So what does it really take? What does it really take to begin empathizing? Well, it takes a beginner's mind. So what does that mean? Well, in most cases, you're not the customer. You need to really separate yourself, your experience, your expertise from who you're designing this for. Imagine your product being used for the very first time. So show of hands, how many have actually watched your products being used in a real environment? Just a quick show of hands. Yep. Good. Well, if you haven't, absolutely recommend to. So it's, It sounds like a phrase, but it really is. It's important to get beyond the office. It's important to truly get out of the building at times. Companies like Disney do this all the time. I read a case study about this. They've set up a warehouse at their headquarters, and they have a real-life family room with couches, families, devices to test their site. They really get into how their products are being used in very real situations. Context and environment are really, really important. So, if you're designing a site for coffee, you should be spending time in a coffee shop. Same thing goes for that. So as Keith mentioned earlier with Magento 2, it's more important than ever to make sure that you've got a broad sample of potential users. While you might have 80% of them accounted for, make sure that you understand the full spectrum and you've got needs covered on both ends. And as you can imagine, inspiration can come in different forms and from different places. So if any of you have been to the Genius Bar at the Apple Store, it might feel familiar to you. It may actually feel more like a luxury hotel and less like a place for technical support. Reality is that's not a coincidence. Apple spent a lot of time thinking about this and really took this from a different perspective. And in the end, the results were surprising. So you too can be surprised at home with those types of results and come up with something that inevitably will delight your customers. So where do we get started? So in the empathize phase, it's important than ever to identify that target audience. Remember, think broadly and from multiple perspectives. So think about who's going to be using the solution, what are going to be their pain points, and how are we currently addressing those needs? So with empathize, there are many tools to really build that empathy for your customers. Interviews and contextual research can often be most helpful, and we'll see this later in the workshop with those real examples from the mobile plans. Both group and semi-structured interviews allow you to listen to customers and their needs, and from both a collective and an individual perspective. Contextual research is actually also popular as well and really allows you to observe customers in their natural environment. In addition, you may have packages like Google Analytics and Adobe and others to gather those to help build an understanding and create an understanding that they'll take with you with future phases of design thinking. They're all powerful, but again, take it from multiple perspectives. So this is our first activity. So we're going to show you an example of a group interview that's being done during the empathize phase. In order to do that, again, we're going to need your help as one of the participants. You're going to be participant 1. So remember from the design challenge, and again, use your own personal experience using a mobile phone plan. I think everybody should be familiar with this. You're going to be the customer, and we'd like you to play the role of a participant in a study in the empathize phase, providing your needs and jotting down a couple pain points of shopping for a new mobile plan. So think about one of your more recent experiences. What happened? Were you successful? What did you feel about that? So let's take a minute or two to go through that, and then we'll then continue the activity as a team and share a few of them. So if you haven't already, go ahead and open up to page number 9 in your workbook, and we'll begin jotting down some of those. And we'll just take a minute or two to think about that. All right, let's go ahead and move on then. I think I see a lot more heads up than down, so I think we're at a good stopping place. So go ahead and turn to your next page. Keep what you've written down, but turn to your next page. We're going to take a look at what's essentially a very basic research summary. But what we're going to do is go out to the audience. Let's go through a handful of your experiences to add to this. Again, you're participant 1. Keith's going to walk around with a microphone. Who'd like to share their pain points as a customer with a mobile plan? Who'd like to start?
Hi. Okay. So usually my main pain point would be like none of the plans really match my usage, like the way I use data or calls or minutes.
Yep. Excellent. Anybody else like to share?
Unclear pricing, just not clear what's free, what involves a payment up front, when it's 3 months. Often it's 3 months for free and then something, and you have to read all the T's and C's, and it's not user-friendly.
Absolutely, thank you. And then one more.
There are too many choices.
My name is Konstantin. Oh, sorry.
Too many choices?
Too many choices. I don't know how to compare.
My name is Konstantin, and issues with like zones of availability, 3G, 4G, where does it work, all those details.
Perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for. And so I appreciate everybody participating here. You know, as you see, participant 3, participant 5 saw a lot of the things that you saw as well. So, so again, you're really, in a short amount of time, imagine doing this with one of your customers and really spending the time to summarize that. That's really the seed or the genesis of how design thinking works. So what's next? Well, define is next. And so we've covered the basics of empathize. As you can see, empathize was about observing. So the next step in design thinking is define. Define is about collecting that information from everything that you learned about it in empathize and seeing the challenge in a very meaningful way. So it's about identifying and documenting those user needs and requirements very early in the process. As you can see from this diagram, again, through convergence and divergence, we're starting to narrow things down. We've come up with a lot of, needs, a lot of pain points. We're starting to narrow those down in this particular phase. So keep that in mind. So why is this important? Simply put, it's important to make sure you're solving for the correct problem. Many of you probably have your own personal experiences where if you don't solve the problem early enough, the result is costly. And so making sure that you're solving for the right problem is really, really important when it comes down to defining, even within design thinking as well. So make sure you're doing that and that you're remembering the who, the what, and the how from empathize, which we've put again here in your workbook. So with define, there's several methods to define your problem. We're going to spend a little bit of time with a couple exercises in this, specifically some of the items here on the left. So with define, in particular, the items here on the left, we want to be answering questions, asking basic questions like who, what, and how. There are a lot of tools like customer journey maps that begin to create things like shared understandings of customer interactions over time. Conducting root cause analysis helps us answer questions like why. So today we're going to focus on these, and again, I think you'll have a better understanding of what that is as we begin defining the things that we just found in empathize. Just a note on personas. So this isn't in the workbook, but we will be sending this out afterwards. Personas, if you haven't done them before, are an incredibly useful tool to begin aligning behaviors, needs, and goals to those of your end customers. And so when you think about focusing your efforts, when you think about wanting to answer the right questions and deliver the solutions, personas are often a great tool to do so. So on the right-hand side of the slide here, see a pretty basic example of a developer persona. So in that you see some initial behaviors, deep technical knowledge, experience with Magento, needs and goals. What are they trying to achieve? And again, these exercises can be done relatively quickly. They can be refined over time. They're often informed and informed through research. But in the end, you're really thinking about 3 major questions. What defines them? What are their motivations? And are there any common attributes or characteristics? That's really what it's all about. So in this next exercise, we've done a lot of this for you. But the idea here is for us to kind of walk through what a customer problem statement is. And so again, what's a customer problem statement? Customer problem statement really is in sentence form. It answers those questions around who, what, and why. And so we're going to do this together using our mobile phone plan scenario here on page number 13. So if you're not there already, we'll go ahead and go to that. So again, it's simply put. And a lot of this sounded pretty familiar with the empathize piece. So who am I? I'm a mobile phone user. What? I want to find a plan that matches my needs. But the problem is, why? It's difficult to choose that new phone plan. And so then it gets down to the root cause. So what is the root cause? We actually cover that in the 5 whys. So hold that thought, and we'll do this in the next activity. So again, we're just framing that problem and using basic constructs. One of the things you'll notice, it looks, if anybody who's in Agile right now, should look very familiar. This is actually the basics of a user story. So when we talked about Agile being very compatible with the design thinking, this is a good example of that. So, as I mentioned, with root cause analysis, which is what we were getting to with the customer problem statement, we often use the 5 whys method. The 5 whys method is really all about asking why to the same question 5 times. Sounds simple, right? So for those of you with children at home, you probably get this question all the time. Dad, can I have candy? Why? Use it at home, works fantastic. We've learned a lot from others in this process, but it applies to business as well. You really get to some depth in understanding the problem and really begin to define things. And so for the purposes of the workshop, again, we filled this out for you. We're going to take the answer of this and bring it into the customer problem statement at the end. But let's try this together. So again, as many of you identified, it's difficult to find and it's difficult to choose a new phone plan. So why is that the case? Well, why is it difficult to choose a plan? Well, I'm overwhelmed by options. So why am I overwhelmed by options? Well, I can't find the right fit for my needs. Okay, we're getting somewhere, right? So why can't I find the right fit for my needs? Well, these options offer services that I don't need. Well, why don't these options, why are they offering services they don't need? Well, it's because they don't know. They don't know exactly what I need. Why don't they know what I need? Well, it's because I can't customize my own plan. So even with 5 progressions, and there's no perfect number, try 6 if you feel like you haven't gotten to it yet. You're really getting to the root cause and really getting to defining a problem in a fairly straightforward way that you can build from. You can create ideas from. You can prototype. You can test. And that's really the purpose here. So for the purposes of the workbook, go ahead and we've got I am unable to or I'm not able to customize my own plan. We can go ahead and put that. That's the statement we put in the customer problem statement in the end. So the two of them work hand in hand. This one's my favorite. So we've covered a couple ways to do define in written form. But what if you're a visual person like myself and like Keith? Customer journey maps are a fantastic way for you to show how a customer will actually use your product or website across different stages of a product or customer lifecycle. So to do this right, you're going to need research, you're going to need personas, and a really good understanding of how customers interact with these experiences. The example that we have here right now is a very simple one. If you look online, there are very, very detailed ones. We've shared examples from the Exploratorium Museum in San Francisco. There's a couple transportation services that do these as well. But it's really about capturing that sentiment. It makes research easy to share. Again, it's about taking things, making them actionable, and generating consensus with the team using a very singular visualization. So in this example, again, we're taking the mobile phone scenario, but with any experience, you can see how this person goes from moments of confusion to anger to somewhere in between. Again, very, very powerful tool, begins to build on things that you've started to find. In this case, we have the different channels, whether it be online, retail, and phone. So we've given you this example, and this one's on page 15 in your workbook. All right, so that's defined, at least the basics of it. So with those problems defined, let's start generating those ideas in the ideate phase. So ideate's about taking the problem you just defined and creating ideas to solve it. It's about finding a solution and letting your creativity go wild. So as you can imagine, generating lots of ideas helps remove creative filters from thinking. You'll find that if you only have one idea, it's easier to defend them. If you have multiple ideas, you're really getting some breadth and you don't feel as tied to it. And that's really an important part of the process. It's really about taking that idea and taking another idea on top of that and creating what we call a creative leap to make those deeper concepts. It's a really important notion, and for a lot of folks, it's a big shift in how you may have done traditional design. So if anybody's an analyst out there, what do the ideas look like? What is, if you were to measure these from brilliant to absurd, what would it look like? Well, it would look something like this. When you generate a lot of ideas, you can expect to have a range from brilliant to absurd to somewhere in between. This is just kind of a graph to kind of let you know what to expect throughout the process. So how do you do it? There's a couple different methods that can accomplish this very nicely. We're going to go through one in particular here shortly, but really 4 major ones that work quite well. Rapid sketching, otherwise known as Crazy Eights, is something that is done by many of the companies that Keith had mentioned, and it's as simple as taking a piece of paper, folding it 8 ways, and doing a sketch every 30 seconds. So you're done in 4 minutes, and you've quickly exhausted all possible ideas on a piece of paper and only have invested just a short amount of time. That's where it gets the idea. That's where the idea is from, and it's done very, very rapidly. Process flows, many of you have probably seen these before as well, but if you haven't, it's really just a flow chart to help you visualize the steps and identify opportunities along the way. What happens when and why. active brainstorming. Again, it's building on that collective energy of the group. Just a side note here, make sure that when you do this, that the ideas are actionable or captured. Very often, you can go to a brainstorming session and there's really not a lot of synthesis. There's really not a lot of, it doesn't become as actionable as it could be. So what goes from a couple of good ideas to something you can actually prototype and test. Watch out for those and make sure you structure those and invest the time setting those up properly. And last but not least, try saying this 3 times, participatory co-design is a fantastic tool to actually design with your customers. So not only are you designing with them in mind, but you're designing with them, and you'd be really surprised with the results. There's actually a couple good case studies, one in particular that comes to mind in public education back in the States where an agency was brought in, sat down with students in an elementary school, and we're able to design a solution with them together, and the ideas were amazing, and far more than anything that they've experienced themselves. And so that's exactly what they took, that's exactly what they prototyped, and that's exactly what they tested. So that one's we underestimate, I think, the power of those. So I encourage you to look for opportunities to do those with teams as well. So, as you can imagine, generating ideas, and certainly a lot of them, can be difficult, if not stressful, for many people. So, it's really important to think about 3 principles along the way. So, be open-minded. Again, there's no such thing as a bad idea. It's a phrase that's said a lot, but there really isn't such thing as a bad idea, and I'll show you a few here in a minute. Be optimistic. So, defer your judgment. It comes down to generating all of those ideas and really not feeling like you have to hold on to one or not. Be optimistic about it. These are your ideas. They're the ideas for the team. Everybody is trying to solve the problem of problem for the common good. And last but not least, be courageous. So replace fear with curiosity. Really think about that a bit. So your initial thoughts of like, oh my gosh, and you probably see people like this, and from time to time, people afraid to go to the whiteboard, people afraid to draw. It's okay. Draw. Just get it out of your head. Replace that fear with curiosity, and you'll be surprised with the results. So we're on to our next activity here. So this one's going to be a lot of fun. This is what we call rapid sketching, otherwise known as Crazy 8s. And so if you haven't gotten a pencil yet already, I'd suggest that you do so. We're going to take the ideas and really think about those pain points, think about experiences, think about solving everything that we've already established in previous phases of design thinking. So think what we talked about and begin to sketch out some solutions for it. We're going to do it relatively quickly, actually rather quickly. I'm going to use a stopwatch, and it's going to look a lot at the end like the example on the bottom of your page, or as we've blown it up here, like this. And so, much like I had promised with the graph, the ideas range from brilliant to absurd to somewhere in between. You'll likely see the same thing. You may encounter absurd aliens and mind reading along the way. That's okay, because you know what? In the end, there'll be something in there that you could probably build from, certainly within a group. That's okay. That's really the benefit of the process. So we're going to do this ourselves. I'm going to be your timekeeper on this one. So go ahead and change to page 19 in your workbook if you're not there already. Go ahead and do some stretches. Get a pencil out, and we're going to go ahead and get started in just a minute. So any questions before we get started? You guys are being shy today. So we're designing solutions for mobile plans. So, sorry about that. All right. So again, we're going to do this 8 times. Each drawing is going to be done for 30 seconds. I'm going to be using a stopwatch here, so if you hear some beeps and buzzers, I'll be your play-by-play for this one. But we'll go ahead and get started here in about 10 seconds. So everybody get ready. Again, page number 19 in your workbook, and we're going to create those ideas here shortly. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Sketch number 1, please. All right, there we go. Pleasant music means we're done, right? So very good. All right. Well, I didn't hear any groaning or didn't hear any laughing. Everybody seemed to be taking it pretty seriously. How'd everybody do? Wait, I see somebody crying back there. There's no crying in design. It's okay. It's all right. Don't worry. It's fine. What did everybody think? Was that easy? Was it hard? Was it stressful? Stressful? Yes. It's okay. It happens. So, well, the point of this is really to think think broadly, and imagine bringing that same 4.5 minutes that we just took going through this, bringing it back to your own problems, your own solutions that you're designing for. It's amazing how we don't take enough time to do so. So the point of the exercise is to really kind of go through that with an example that you're probably familiar with, but you're going to be more familiar with the needs of your own business by doing it yourself. So this technique's used all the time. Again, it's called rapid sketching, and sometimes also called crazy eights, based on the number of drawings that we'll cover. So I appreciate you humoring in. Hopefully, if you do get a chance, go ahead and share those on Twitter. Pictures of those. Those are kind of fun. We've done a couple of them as well. I sent one before of some of our work that we brought back from the States. All right, we've generated lots of ideas, and with rough math, we've got over 900 ideas that we're just sitting on in this room right now. So at this point, we've got a prototype, and we've got to do something with them. And so prototype is that next phase in design thinking. The prototype phase is about creating understanding of the ideas and really putting together a simulation or a prototype to do it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a fully built out product. And what you'll find is prototypes are faster, cheaper, and easier to build than the real thing. The cost of making a mistake, again, much later in the process or the project, and especially after launch, far greater than what it would take to build a prototype. So let's look at a couple of different examples. So what we're taking a look at here is what we call low fidelity prototypes. On the left is actually an early wireframe for Magento 2. We made it clickable. You can do this through a variety of different ways using tools like Acture, but even through PowerPoint, Acrobat, whatever you're comfortable with. But you can do that with boxes and arrows. You can do that in a very, what we call low fidelity, compared to something that actually looks like the real product. That's okay. It's important to get your thoughts around it. Get something you can test very quickly in the process. On the right is a paper prototype. I really like this example. The idea here is that you can do something, if not quicker than what you could do in a wireframe form, but put it in the hands of a customer. You look at this and you've got a mobile device and you're already starting to think about the interactions and the touch points that are involved in this. And the example that's provided by Creative Blog, you can use a long piece of paper to simulate scrolling. That's okay. They're quick, they're dirty, you learn, and then you move on. And that's really the point of prototyping, certainly here with low fidelity prototypes. So on the opposite end of that is a high fidelity prototype. High fidelity prototype have a lot of other benefits as well. So what you see here is an example of a high fidelity prototype for Magento 2.0. We use these types of prototypes all the time with Magento 2. We also use them for commerce order management as well. And there's a lot of side benefits to these as well. While they take a little bit more investment, you can actually partner with teams and colleagues to reuse a lot of the HTML, the CSS, a lot of the materials that are used in the process as well. So there are some benefits there downstream in terms of your overall efficiency, which we've seen ourselves. And as you'll see in your workbook, beyond just digital and paper prototypes, there are also storyboard-based and physical prototypes as well, which we don't cover in as much detail. But storyboards are just like a comic strip. They're just like a film strip. They're really meant for understanding the big picture. Physical prototypes are often more used in industrial design using real materials and give you a better representation of the experience, but can be rather costly to make. But we put those in there as well. So we have another activity, but the good thing is we've done this one for you. So for the purpose of the workshop, we're giving you a prototype. It happens to be your mobile carrier's website. And so if you have a minute, go ahead and jot down the name of your mobile carrier's website in step number 2 here on page 22 of the workbook. So let's assume it's already built. We're going to pretend it's there. And if you haven't done so already, let's spend a minute or so familiarizing yourself with your website. We're going to be using this for when Keith takes you through the test phase here shortly. So we'll make sure that, let's just make sure we're familiar with it, we know the site, and that we're ready to go. So we'll take a minute, and then we'll move on. All right, so now that the prototype is built, let's go ahead and move to the next phase of design thinking. So I'm going to ask Keith to join me and bring everything together for the last portion of design thinking and test.
Now we come to the point where we're testing. Now, testing is a critical part of the process. And in this phase, we're going to be converging towards a goal. We'll be eliminating the bad ideas that don't pass testing. Now, why testing? Collecting feedback is critical to your success. Now, with every iteration of the test, potential problems are identified and eliminated. The more you iterate, the better it gets. And it's important to discover your failures quickly. failure is part of the process. You must embrace it. That is the whole point. And how do you find out you failed? You do that by testing. Identify the problems, and then rinse, lather, and repeat. So this slide summarizes some research that Eric and I have been doing recently. We have been studying beer. And so in testing, there's two categories of research. There's quantitative and qualitative. Now, quantitative is about numbers. It's about data and metrics. And so if you look at the beer, it's 15 centimeters tall, about 500 milliliters of beer. But if you look at qualitative, it talks more about the emotion and describes the sensor. So you get this, and the beer has a beautiful amber color, sweet aroma, crisp finish. So we'll be continuing to study later if you'd like to participate. Now, there's three key methods for conducting research. There's expert reviews, attitudes, and behaviors. Now, first, this slide, we're talking about expert reviews. And this is a usability professional or designer. And they evaluate your product based on standards, best practices, and industry best practices. This is actually a very popular method. The attitude method is popular with business people and marketers. Now, what it does is it tells you what people are saying about your product or your site. And this method can be effective, but it's also a dangerous method. And the reason being is that what people say and what people do are actually often two different things. And so how do we get beyond that? We like the third method. The third method, behavioral, is actually my favorite. With this, we actually get past that bias and having people say things and do differently things. We actually get to observe people using the product, and it gets us to our best data. There's several methods with this. One is the cognitive walkthrough. In the cognitive walkthrough, the moderator actually kind of walks you through the experience and asks you questions along the way. So it has high moderator engagement. Now, user interviews is not unlike what we did earlier in the empathize phase. So it's kind of an open question and answer. You ask them basic questions and listen to their feedback. Usability testing happens to be my favorite and often the most effective. It's a very good method, especially for getting data. So what you do is you set up tasks, you ask the users to perform those tasks, and you observe them doing those tasks. Now, that requires less moderator engagement. And what you do is you ask the participant to talk out loud. So what are you thinking? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? And as they go through the experience, they're talking out loud, and you're gathering data. And so it requires less moderator engagement, and you often get better results. Now, today, what we're actually going to do is we're going to do a usability study in the brief time that we have left. And so what we'll do is we'll run this test as a group. Normally, if you were doing this at home, what you would do is these steps. You'd identify the test team. You'd create the test scenarios, the actual task you want them to do. You'd recruit your participants. You'd then run the test, analyze your data, and finally report back on the results. And so we're going to do a very condensed version of that today. There's several tips to consider when you're actually conducting a test. And you as the moderator must be very careful of the things you say and how you say them. The reason being is that you can introduce bias and lead the participants into essentially giving them the answer. So what you do is you want to talk as little as possible, and you want to ask open-ended questions. That means don't ask questions that are easily answered with yes or no. This sheet has a lot of great tips on various questions, and if you ever get stuck, going back to just one of these basic questions will get you right back out of it and get the participant talking again. Remember, it's about listening and not talking. When you do talk, be actively listening to the participant and then ask a thoughtful question that builds on what they've already said. And then remember to avoid leading. And what leading means is if there's a red button on the screen, don't talk about the red button or say the color red. You'll lead them right to the button. Instead, ask them one of these open-ended questions like, what would you do next? Now, it's really important to consider how unnatural the situation is. You have a stranger sitting there and you're asking them a bunch of questions and they can't help but feel like they're being judged and analyzed. So it's very important to build rapport. So put them at ease. There's a couple of really key points to this. You want to Always provide them clear context, make them feel comfortable. Remind them that they can end the test and exit at any time. You also want to ask their permission if you're doing something like recording them. And it's really good to have a lot of warm-up questions to really get them into the mindset or the context of the questions you're about to ask. You don't want to just come out of the gate and start hitting them with questions. Now, these are the instructions on the actual test we're about to conduct. We'll go more into these in detail here shortly. But first, let's talk about the roles. Today for the test, we're going to have 3 roles. Now, the first one is the moderator, also known as the facilitator. This is the person who's actually conducting the test and managing it. Remember the points I made before. Ask open-ended questions, avoid leading. Now, the test is, while it seems easy on the surface, conducting this conversation and being on your best behavior for the entire talk is surprisingly difficult. And so it's helpful to have someone there with you from your team. I strongly advise you take a note taker with you. The note taker takes the notes during the session and will actually have additional benefit to you because after the session you can follow up with them, compare your notes and discuss it. You'll often discover things that you missed in the process of actually managing the conversation. The third person, and actually the most important, is the participant, the person who's actually taking the test, providing their feedback. So here's what we're going to do today. We've provided the materials for you to conduct the test, materials for each of the roles. We have a test plan for the test moderator. We have 2 blank sheets for the note taker. And then finally, the test participant, again, is going to use their mobile device on their mobile carrier of choice, their website. What we'll ask you to do is we'll ask you to conduct the test. We'll have the moderator, you need to break into these groups of 3, and the moderator will interview the volunteer participant, and the note taker will take notes. We'll conduct the test for about 7 minutes, and then we'll take some time to actually let you review your notes together on the team, discuss the process, and then we'd like to share with the larger group about your experience and your feedback and any questions you have about the test process. Any questions before we jump into this? Okay. All right, without further delay, then let's go ahead and get started. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and end it here. And as a reminder, we may be experiencing a fire drill any moment, or we might not. If there's a fire drill, keep calm, ignore the alarm, maintain your seat. It'll be over quickly, I hope. But we can be optimistic and hope that it actually won't happen. But again, it was scheduled for about now. So, I was really happy to hear the energy level, a lot of talking, a lot of conversation. Would anyone like to share their feedback on the experience, both positives and negatives of any role, the moderator or the participant or the note taker? Would you like to share with the group? We'd appreciate it. We have the microphones here. Anyone? Come on, I know there were surprises here. Was it as easy as you thought it would be? Oh, we have one in the back.
Hi, I'm Sam. So we based it on an existing website, the Carrier EE. And I went through their website and immediately we found, as soon as you started looking into purchasing that plan and the phone, it became immediately clear that the process was more aligned to you purchasing a phone as opposed to a plan. And once you start changing your mind, you almost have to start all over again. You have to remember the plan that you chose. You then go back to the home page, you have to remove it from your basket, and it becomes very, very confused straight away. So overall, maybe there's some work to do on the EE website as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it sharing. How was the process? We have someone up here.
Yeah, we had issues, well, a lot of issues. For instance, the UX UI, I guess, issues. There were no like buy button or like add to cart button that were visible enough for the customer. So it was a lot of browsing and just trying to find that button. There was just no coloring on the buttons, I guess. There was a lot of confusion about that it required you to log in or it required you to enter your phone number, and that phone number already has to be a UK phone number. So it's a lot of issues just even getting through the process of getting to the phone plans to begin with.
So do you think that they've watched for people use their website in the past? I mean,
probably not, because these are really obvious and like one person kind of test.
Exactly. This isn't rocket science. You don't necessarily have to change the world. Very simple things. The buy button was not obvious. For example, it seems like they would want you to be able to buy something. Seems like that's in their interest. So 5 minutes, so many learnings. Yes?
Sure.
As a note taker, the notes that I've been taking is more like the process, describing the process that the user was doing, like user selects a SIM-only plan, etc. So following the process, is that what you want as a note
There's
taker?
a real art form to note taking, and if you start trying to transcribe like a court stenographer, it actually gets very difficult, and you start missing things. So we develop shorthand and techniques. You want to capture things like intent, the moment, the things that were said, the things that they were doing. Because again, you're trying to get beyond the verbatim, and you're trying to get to that next level of insight. And so it's very tricky as the note taker. It is a skill, and it does take practice. Yes?
Do you need a note taker if you're video?
Well,
Is there not an inherent
You could-
bias from the note taker?
yes, you
Just
could
'cause the
do the
best thing-
video.
Yeah.
First, 2 opinions are helpful. But also, when you use just video, you double the amount of time, if not triple it, in terms of the analysis you have to do. You have to watch yourself do the video over and over again. And you'll find it's actually surprisingly less efficient in terms of not just the quality of the feedback you extract out of it, and it takes much more time. If you want to go back and review the video, that's excellent, but don't minimize the impact or the value of the note taker.
Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, over here. Good luck, Eric.
Sorry. Yes.
Thank you so much, guys. We know the room is tight. We appreciate you staying in here with us.
Thanks. I was the interviewee, and it felt very natural. I was describing it in a one-to-one relationship while Tony was whacking the notes down, but it flowed. I couldn't see it working in a bigger group. If you've got 3 or 4 people and only one interviewer, I think people would then be vying for attention, but it kind of just a one-to-one conversation. It flowed out. We captured some good notes. So
And thank you for that, because I appreciate it, because as I said before, the attitudinal methods like focus groups and surveys, that's exactly why they fail at some level. You have 10 people in a room, you think you're going to get 10 times as much value, but what you actually only get are 1 or 2 people talking or providing their value. And so the one-on-one interview gives you a lot more natural setting, and you get a lot more information out of that individual. You don't want to squash anyone's opinions. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, one more. Thank you.
I find it very difficult as a moderator not to introduce my own bias when the customer came across a pain point. So he wasn't sure where to go next, and I kind of wanted to naturally kind of say what I would do. What do you do in that scenario? How do you...
It takes practice, and actually that's a great segue to some of the next content here, because what you have to do is put your bias and your egos aside. There's lots of things that are happening here, right? Like you have your opinions, you want to share with them. This is what I was talking about being on your best behavior for the entire conversation, right? Remind yourself constantly, you already know what you think. You're going through the trouble to talk to that person to get their feedback. The more you say, the more you lead, the more you water down the quality or amount of their content. So just remind yourself to talk less, and that's why I say it so much. Say it to yourself constantly, talk less, listen more, and you'll get a lot more value out of it. But it's very difficult. It takes practice. So let's go ahead and close on the content here, if you don't mind, because we have just a few minutes left.
Thank you.
And we'll have more time for questions after the session, so I appreciate it. So let's talk about measurements and analysis here. So you've gone through the trouble of doing the test. Now, you're in a real danger zone here, because if you don't do proper analysis, the question about the video was a great one. If you don't do proper analysis, you're really just going to regurgitate the opinion or the bias you probably had before the study. It's important to be very honest about the process, go through the data that you have, and do a proper analysis. Now, we talked about quantitative and qualitative measurements earlier, and it works for more than just beer. So one of the great things about usability testing is we can install quantitative measurements. So we do things like the note taker is very valuable for this. We do things like we capture success rate. How many people successfully completed the task? How many people were able to complete it? We also ask, or we'll also track things like time on task, which is, the video is actually quite useful for going back and getting the exact time it takes each participant to do the task. We also capture those scores like I shared before in terms of satisfaction and ease of use. We ask people to rate it. Now what's great about these quantitative metrics is that as you capture this data, then you iterate, just like in the example I showed you earlier with 2.1 and staging. We know the design was better because we saw all the scores improve. We have a very quantitative, solid metric that tells us we made the design better. Now, these metrics aren't perfect. They involve humans and potential human error, but there was a clear increase in the usability of the site based on our changes. Also, don't forget to capture the verbatims. They can be quite useful in invoking emotion, especially when you're presenting stakeholders and other people. The verbatims are often a quite powerful tool about making a case. So, just as we were talking before, the question was a great one because just as a summary, remember the participants that you're talking to are human. You're human too. We have egos, we have biases, and it's very important for you to follow the process and the steps properly and ensure that you remove yourself from the process to some degree. We all have inherent things. We have our opinions. We don't want to appear like fools, both when we're a participant and the moderator. We have to put our egos aside and trust the process is going to lead us to the right answer. Remember to look for surprises as well. If you don't find surprises, if at the end of the study all you learned was that you were 100% correct, I guarantee you, you did something wrong. There are always surprises, aha moments, things you never thought about. And that's actually the most fun about the process, is discovering those things. There's a moment when we'll look over at each other across the table and go, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't see that coming. We only thought about it for months. It always happens and it's always amazing. So that's really it. Eric, would you mind joining me here? So that's the entire workshop. Again, we managed to get it under time. So feeling pretty impressed with ourselves for the timing at the very least. But we have just a few minutes here left for questions. If anybody has any more, we'd love to take them. Yep. Oh, yes. Oh, it's not going to work with both of us, is it?
It's not.
All right.
It's okay.
You can do it.
Absolutely. Sorry, who was it again? Oh, sorry. Yep.
I've got a question about the task, when you're setting up the task. What happens if the first task is a blocker and the second and third tasks are dependent on the first task being completed?
That's a great question. And what we do is we find it at some point, because quite often we'll see the task build on themselves. And so at some point, if they're stuck, you have to give them a clue to move them on. Now there's a real danger to this, because what you do at the beginning of the test is you preach that there's no wrong answers, you can't make any mistakes, there's no such thing as right or wrong. And then you're caught in this moment where they can't do the first one, and you're about to remind them that they actually did something wrong. So you're about to break the whole illusion that there's no right or wrong. And so you have to be very careful about how you do that and say, okay, for question number 2, I'd like us to start from here. Take the mouse or the navigate for them, put them on the right spot to start the next task, and do your best to set the context of the start of that step without implying that they did something wrong. Remember, there actually is no such thing as a wrong answer. It's important to remind yourselves when a user fails, it's because of the design and not the user. And it's actually true. Regardless of education, experience, we put this whole wide swath of people into that chair, give them the same task. You'd be amazed at how many people see or experience the same problem. We are, after all, human animals that share the same millions of years of evolution. So we tend to solve problems and think in the same way. Anyone else? There's got to be more. It was only an hour. It's taken us years to get to this point. Anyone? Anyone? Yes, please.
In your example, you only had 3 questions. How many questions have you been able to get into before it gets too complicated or too difficult to go
Great
further?
question. We tend to target about a 45-minute session and assume 5 to 10 minutes for a warm-up and 5 to 10 minutes for wind down. There's always a few bumps in the road in terms of getting started. And after, don't be afraid to potentially cut a session short, for example. What we do is we target an hour, And for example, that tends to be about 8 questions. I'll throw a 9 or a 10th in there. But the reality is for the test to be valid to get scores, we like to get, for example, everyone through the first 8 questions and assume the 9th and 10th question are extra. We actually have to stop here, though, because we're short on time.
We are, yeah.
I do want to make one plug, though. You guys, in your backpacks, you will find this handout, Magento User Experience Insights. I shared that story about staging. It was volunteers just like yourselves who sat in those chairs, tested that product, and help us make it better. And so one of the things that we do here is we're asking for more volunteers for future sessions. And so we have a form here and an email address. Simply email us or come take our cards. We'd love to talk more with you about it. You will get to see the future of Magento and help make it better by participating in this study. And what's more, for every user test that you do, every hour session, we will give you a $100 coupon for a future Magento event. So I'm not bribing you here, but if you talk to me quite a few times next year, you could be here for free. Well, at least
no disguises either.
Yes.
We'll pick it up.
Absolutely, yes. And so I hope the events team didn't hear that. But yes, talk to us as much as you like, and we'll give you as many coupons as you like to participate. So we really appreciate it. And thank you guys for sticking with us through this session. We hope you learned something and enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, everybody.